everyone, Paul here. In this little PowerApps video, I am going to seemingly defy the laws of physics. And that is, I'm going to write an app that makes use of images from an online source, SharePoint in this case. But I'm actually going to show you how you can cache those images locally so that they can run when things are offline. But I'm not going to do it using the typical method of uploading media into the PowerApp media store, so my app stays small and less bloaty. So let's see how we go about defying the laws of physics, shall we?
So I've made a little demo app here that I'll kind of use to take us through our little journey of learning today. So no PowerPoint today, we're using PowerApps for a bit of presentation as well as demo. So the aim here is we want to build a pretty common scenario where we have navigation, interactive navigation. You can see here I'm clicking a menu, I get sub-menus, and I'm getting these nice icons that go along with it. Now, but here's the thing, here's my requirement. I want to do almost a seemingly contradictory thing. The first one is I want all of these icons and their configuration maintained outside the application. I actually want to maintain them in a SharePoint list. This allows me to make changes in the app without having to republish the app and go through the whole application lifecycle management. In this case, that's fine. But the contradictory thing there is I also want this to work offline. I want users to be able to use it when they don't have internet and yet still have this nice experience. So that might seem weird. How can you do that where you have navigation in SharePoint, like centrally maintained navigation, yet as soon as SharePoint's gone via not being on the internet, how does it work? So to explain that, I'm actually going to take you through the typical ways that icons are done in an application like this in PowerApps, and we'll look at the pros and cons of each before coming up with the method that I use. So, as you can see, this is what we want to build. Just to show you the structure that we're going to use to build this, the rough structure, and it doesn't have to be this way, I'm just doing this for demo purposes, but the rough structure is this. Behind the scenes, I've kind of got a table, and I've got a column called top navigation, one called sub navigation, and one called icon. And if you look at this gallery here that we were just looking at, the basic gist is this. The top navigation is simply going through and saying, look, bring me back any items from this table where sub nav is blank. If sub nav is blank, I know by definition that that's the top navigation, hence menu 1, menu 2, menu 3, and just grab the appropriate icon that comes along with it. The sub-navigation depends on the top navigation. So there's actually two galleries here. So if I click menu 2, for example, it changes the sub-navigation. Why? Because this gallery basically says, go to this table and only bring me back entries where my top navigation equals whatever is selected up here. So for example, I have menu 2 selected right now. That means we're only looking at these 3 entries, but I'm excluding any blank ones. So you don't see any of the top level menus, which leaves us just with the sub menus. And the basic gist, as you go through that, you can see that it works quite nicely. So that's basically what the intent is, and that's the structure that we're going to use to deliver it. So allow me to present Exhibit A, which is the traditional way that people tend to do icons. Now, let me go out of play mode for a second in the app, and this is that classic scenario where you would come to the media section inside PowerApps and you would then manually upload all of the icons that you need and have them stored in the media gallery. Now, right now I'm only using 128K because I'm using small icons, but it allows you to put pretty big images in with a 200 meg total media storage. I pity downloading and installing your app if you put 200 megabytes worth of images in this gallery. So then I've got a little button here to demo called Initialize Collection. And so what am I doing here? You can see here that I'm running a clear collect to initialize a collection. My collection is called nav icons, and I have 3 columns, and it basically represents what we were just looking at. There's a column called top menu name, there's a column called sub menu name, and there's a column called icon. And some of these entries don't have a sub menu. So in other words, they'll end up being blank. So if I initialize and just run that code, you can see what happens. Initialize collection, here are my menus. Let's go and have a look at that collection, which I called nav icons. And you can see that's what's being produced. Very similar to what I showed in the original screen, one screen back. Now, and so the icons refer directly to those icons inside the media gallery. Now, it works, it's fine. It's also quite fast and efficient, but what are the cons? Well, pros and cons. If you go back to my design goals, it doesn't meet my design goals. So first up, the pro. This does work offline, and the reason it works offline is the images come preloaded into the app, which is great. It's also bandwidth efficient because it doesn't have to pull anything across the wire, apart from the first time that you download the app. It'll be a bigger app. And that's what I mean here with the cons. You know, the app can get bloaty. If you put a lot of big images in, naturally the app will take longer to download. But the bigger issue is if I needed to update this and change the structure of that collection or put new entries in, I'm basically having to manually open this app, make my changes, save, publish, and put them out to everyone. So in this case, that doesn't meet my stated design goal. So what can we do about this? Well, enter Exhibit B. So Exhibit B is, I guess, probably what everyone would do initially. It's where you then load your gallery from a SharePoint document library. So I'll show you this, just quickly go into SharePoint what I've done. You can see here that in the SharePoint site behind this app, I have a library called Exhibit B. And if we open that library, you can see what I've done. So in this library, what you can see is I have uploaded a whole bunch of those icons, and I've created 3 additional columns to basically govern how it displays in PowerApps. The first 2 are familiar already. We have the top menu name and the sub-menu name. I added an additional numeric column here called menu order, and that's because if you change these over time, you need to be able to guarantee a certain order that they are rendered in. So I've literally just created a menu order column and then put ascending numbers in so I can control the display of values. Now if we go back to PowerApps and see what that means, it looks like this. First up, let's go and have a look. So all I'm doing here, this button is simply just going to refresh that data source that I have already connected. So that list you were just looking at called Exhibit B, it's a data source connected to this app. If we have a look at this first gallery and we go and have a look at the items property in this gallery, we are simply doing this. We're going, okay, first up, we're going to take Exhibit B, we're going to filter it, and we want to basically filter only when the sub-menu is blank. So remember that logic that I described earlier. And we're going to actually sort the menu order into ascending. So it will actually do it based in lowest to highest. And that renders our icons. Now, the way those icons are being rendered, if I actually show you the code behind there, we are using a property that's built in with all SharePoint connections to PowerApps called link to item. So this is the URL of the item, and I've put that onto a image control in PowerApps. Hence, you're seeing it rendered. Now, this works fine. If I click it, it's all good. I click on the next one, and you can see the sub-menus are updating just like the other one. Just for reference, the gallery for sub-menus it's a cascading type of scenario. What I'm doing here is I'm filtering that same library. So I'm saying the items in this one, I filter the library where the top menu name equals whatever is selected here. And then I go, and by the way, I want the sub-menu to be blank, to be not blank. And so that therefore gives me the sub-menus without re-adding the top menu in there. And once again, I'm using the sort to basically sort it in the way I want. Okay, you probably already noticed, astute PowerApps users would know what this means. Those little yellow exclamation marks there are actually complaining about this. So let's go through the pros and cons, and I'll elaborate on what that means. So the pros and cons in the case of this one is this. Pro, data-driven. There is now no need to redeploy to modify. That is true. If I go into SharePoint now and I change the menu order or the icons, next time you run this app or next time you refresh manually, the state of the app will change. So yes, we have met that. The app is quicker to load because of the fact that there are no preloaded images. We don't load them in advance. But on the other side, that means there's some bandwidth inefficiency because they're loaded on the fly. But here's the big con. It looks great, right? It displays, and while you're in browser mode, this is a perfectly acceptable way of doing things. But I'm now gonna share my phone to the screen and show you what this looks like when we access this Power App on the phone. Okay, we are now looking at my phone, and I'm going to control this from the phone. So I'm going to quickly go next. I've loaded the very same app that we were looking at, next. And Exhibit A we don't need to worry about, but here's Exhibit B, load from the SharePoint document library. Now, this behaves exactly, there's no difference in what we did earlier from the document library to my phone. But here's the thing. Where are our images? We have no problem loading the library, menu 1, menu 2, menu 1, menu 2, menu 3, but the images aren't coming through. And so this is the Achilles heel of this particular method. It will not work on a phone or an iPad because the URL to the link, to the icon, is a SharePoint link. Now when you do it on the phone, you have not yet authenticated or signed into SharePoint. So SharePoint is basically going to say, I don't know who you are, I'm not giving this to you. Whereas when you do it in the browser, you're already signed into SharePoint, you're signed into Office 365, it will work. So this one is basically a bust if you want to use an app like this on your phone. So the other issue that I mentioned was the delegation bit. I hinted to this earlier. It basically means that the data source cannot be processed on the SharePoint side. So all of the filtering work has to be done on the Power App side. Now, in the case of pulling up just a few icons, it's probably not that big a deal. But if, for example, you were querying a library of, say, 500 to 700 icons, it would literally try and pull all 500 to 700 across behind the scenes in Power Apps, just so it can apply the filter. You can tell when you have delegation issues because if you put your cursor over your filter that populates the items in the gallery, you will see a little blue squiggly line. And that's basically saying, sorry, is blank is not a delegated function. Watch out, you may get incomplete results if there's too much data, or it might just be slow because it has to pull a lot of data across from the server to do this. And last of all, this doesn't solve our offline problem. So let me just put this back into play. This option is basically a bust. Yes, we get data driven, but ultimately we do not get offline. Kills it for me that it won't work on phones. You risk delegation issues. Now, just really quickly, we can solve the delegation issue in most scenarios quite quickly. So let me just quickly show you Exhibit B1. And it's a pretty minor difference between this and the other one. So what I've done instead here is rather than talk to SharePoint directly, when this app starts, what it would do is actually create a collection based on that SharePoint list. And provided that SharePoint list is not particularly big, we now have a collection in memory called myExhibit, which actually is used to then populate the menu and populate the navigation. So if I quickly initialize that collection, goes off to SharePoint, makes a copy of the contents of that list, typically do that on startup, and every other part of this gallery, in fact, if you look at the code, the filter was identical, except now it doesn't complain about any delegation issues because it's doing everything client-side anyway. Now, again, this only works in certain circumstances. Fortunately for us, navigation icons do not tend to be huge libraries of thousands of icons. Having said that though, you still would run into issues of having to pull that contents of that SharePoint list to the client side on startup, so it might make it a little bit slower on startup. But in terms of, I guess, in terms of our design goals, or at least in terms of pros and cons, it's worth knowing because it does actually address the delegation issue, but it's more just addresses the delegation complaint, the delegation warning. You still ultimately have to have all of that data in memory. But of course, this does not help you on phones and won't work offline. So what can we do about this? In fact, there is another option you can do in SharePoint, and this gets around the phone issue. So here's one way to solve the phone problem. Enter Exhibit C. So in Exhibit C, we are actually loading the data from a SharePoint list rather than the library using the hyperlink column. So let me quickly show you this before we get into the screen. If I go back to SharePoint, you can see that I have a list here called Exhibit C. Now, Exhibit C is actually using the data in Exhibit B, as you will soon see. So let's take a look. Okay, Exhibit C, you can see, it's a straight up SharePoint list, and it basically has that top menu, submenu, and menu order column as before, but it has this extra column called icon. So what is going on with this icon column? Let's have a look at the list settings to find out, shall we? So you can see that I've made an extra column called icon, and I have made it of type hyperlink. And in fact, so when I expand this column, there's an additional parameter where I've also said format URL as picture. Just to show you the raw data behind the scenes, I'm going to quickly change this back to a hyperlink just to show you. So let me click OK. Okay. Now looking at this list, can you see that the icon is in fact a URL? And if we expand this and show you, I am literally just pointing to the documents I uploaded into the Exhibit B document library. So this list is more or less a pointer that refers to the document library where the content is actually stored. Okay. It is vitally important though that it is formatted as a picture. So just bear that in mind. Okay. So in this app, here's what we're doing. This time, if we look in the gallery, the source for the gallery is Exhibit C. And it's being filtered in virtually the same manner as when we were doing Exhibit B. So we're saying, hey, go to this list. I want to see all blank submenus and just bring them back in the right order, from smallest to biggest, which then produces this. So the only difference is if we look at this little image control, it is actually using that icon column that we were just looking at. So that brings back the icon. Now, the beauty of this method is it works on the phone. Okay, if you use a HTML column in SharePoint and you format that column as a picture, must be a picture, that gives PowerApps enough to be able to render it on the phone. I've actually written a blog post on what happens behind the scenes, which I'll reference here, but I'm not going to go into that for the purposes of this discussion. So let's look at the pros and cons of this method. So first up, it is data-driven. We meet the data-driven need, so that's a tick. We also have a smaller app because we don't preload the images into the app itself. And I suppose the big one, it also works on phones. So this method will work across all the different device types and scenarios that PowerApps runs. We still have this con, it's persistent. It won't work offline, and that's because ultimately it's the URL that it provides to the image, and PowerApps has to go and retrieve that URL, and if you're offline, it won't be able to. It also has the delegation issue as per Exhibit B. So if you look closely, you'll see that it's got that same problem. We're querying a SharePoint list, and we just happen to be using query types that have delegation issues. Here's another one though. This one is latency sensitive. Take a look at this. If I click this icon, did you see that slight delay that happened to load it? And I'll show you this one too. So I suspect what's happening there, it's the way that this stuff is rendered. There's a bit of magic that happens in the middle to actually retrieve these images. And so the magic to basically go and pull these images down creates a slight delay, and that might be annoying for your users. Another interesting issue about this one, it doesn't really affect this scenario, but it's worth mentioning. That hyperlink column that we made called icon cannot be updated from within PowerApps. So, in fact, let me show you an example. Okay, so in this little button, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm using an update if command, and I'm saying, I would like you to update, go to the exhibition C list and just grab me the first item. I've just hard coded it saying, hey, give me ID number 1 and change the icon to google.com. Okay, that icon column. If I try this, here's what happens. Straight away you can see an error. And if I put my cursor over, it says icon, the specified column is read only and can't be modified. So the issue is this. While the icon format is in the hyperlink format, it can be updated from PowerApps. But as soon as you change it to picture format via list settings, here's icon. So let's change it to picture again. You will not be able to write to this column from PowerApps. Now you might be wondering, well, that's not that big a deal. I agree with you in the context of this particular use case, but what if you were taking photos and you wanted to save them and then see those photos back as a gallery, like browsing through a photo gallery? That's the kind of scenario that then gets quite complex because of that restriction. So that's what I meant by hyperlink cannot be updated. And that's Exhibit C. So Exhibit C1, just quickly, just to get around the delegation issue, basically we can still do exactly what we did with B1. So we could pull this stuff into a collection and do it all from the collection. So no different to B1 in that way. I won't spend too much time on this, but it just shows that you can be done. The reason I actually put this up here is it just also, even though this stuff is all in a collection now, it doesn't solve the latency issue. Check it out. There's still that slight delay of disappear and reappear when you do it this way. So now, how do we solve this? We haven't even got to the bit where we've solved the work offline. So what are we going to do about that? Well, enter Exhibit D, and now I'll actually build this out manually so that you can see it. So Exhibit D, we're actually going to use a neat trick with data URI. We are going to use a data URI version of an image in the document library. We are going to pull that into a collection and we are going to display it in line. And this method has the advantage of working offline. So first up, let's break this down and explain what we're going to do. If I go back to the document library, the Exhibit B document library where we were storing all of the icons, we have added an extra column. So I have thrown a column in here called image URI. Now this is a multi-line of text column. That's the thing that is important here. So you might be wondering, well, what is an image URI? For the uninitiated, it was a way to embed images in HTML, so it was part of the HTML document and didn't have to be fetched separately. And so that basically in high latency scenarios was quite efficient because it was better to have the icon embedded in the HTML code rather than all these extra round trips to pull various icons into the page for the page to render. To give you a really quick example, check this out. There are plenty of online tools that will convert an image to a data URI, and I've just randomly picked one. So if I go and grab an image from my computer, and I'll use, say, this icon here, this person icon. If I upload it, so here's my uploaded image, I'll just quickly scroll down and I'll click this button, Convert to Data URI. And now below here, this is what this image looks like if you were to embed it into a HTML encoded and part of your page. So that's the image, but basically in a string format, encoded, base64 encoded string format. Okay, so I wonder if you see where I'm going with this. If we go and have a look at our document library again, how about we produce an image URI version of each image here, and how about we load that into SharePoint? So you might think to yourself, well, that's really difficult. Like, do I have to go through and upload every one to an online site? No, Flow is going to come to our rescue here. So we're going to take advantage of Flow's power to do this really simply. So I'm going to come to the Flow menu here and I'm going to choose Create a Flow. From my choices, I am going to go Show More. And I am going to complete a custom action for the selected file. So I'm thinking we'll just make this a manual flow rather than an automated one, but it would be easy to make an automated one. So I choose that option and off we go into Flowland. And I am happy with this template. Click Continue. And my initial flow gets built. So we'll leave this alone. We're going to add another step. So the first step that we're going to add here is a SharePoint action called Get File Content. In fact, if I just type in Get File Content, I'm sure I'll find it. Get File Content, Get File Content SharePoint. There it is there. So I'm going to need the content of the file that's selected. So first up, we do need to put our site address in. I'll just quickly do that. And the file that we want to generate a data URI for, well, it already comes through the get file properties, and it might even come in for a selected file trigger. So if we scroll down here, and what we are looking for is the file identifier, which is that one there. So I'm going to grab the identifier that came from as an output from the get file properties, which was part of the template. So now we know the file that we need to generate a data URI for. Next, we are going to do this. We are going to do a SharePoint action update update file properties. There's the SharePoint action update file properties. Once again, we put in our site address. We'll choose our library. For my case, it's Exhibit B. The identifier of the item to be updated. Again, I can use this ID out of get file properties, which is great. And the image URI, I'm going to use an expression and check this out. The expression is this, because there happens to be a data URI expression built into Flow. If I type in data URI, open my bracket, as a parameter, all I have to do, that's quite annoying, that pop-up, so let me just make it go away. While your cursor is between the two brackets, if I click dynamic content, I can then go and choose file content from the action that we just did. That has now generated a data URI. So let's just call this flow generate data URI, and we'll save that. Now let's go back to SharePoint and use it. So back in SharePoint, here's our Exhibit B library. And I am going to now click on this first one here, Piggy Bank, go to my flow menu. There is my new flow, generate data URI. I'll run this flow, click continue, click run. Flow says it's run, and if we just wait a moment, keep an eye on this field. And there it is. There is our data URI, all magically done for us. So while I'm here, I'll do this for the two menu ones just quickly, and then I'll pause the video so that I can do the others. I would reiterate that you can obviously do this for on Create or make it much more automated, but in the case of this demo, I've just made it a manual thing. And let's have a look at what we're going to do. So with this one, we already are connected to Exhibit B. If we have a look at my initialized collection here, really this is just refresh data source. So let's go and refresh Exhibit B, okay? And I am going to pull it into my own collection just so that we can see the data. So I'm refreshing the data source and then I'm pulling all of the content of Exhibit B into here, okay? And let's actually do that now and have a look at what we've got. So I'll just quickly initialize that collection. It goes off to SharePoint and we now have my Exhibit B updated. If we view that collection, my Exhibit B, you will now see the data URI in amongst all of the stuff. There it is there. There's the image URI coming through. So we now have what we need. Now just remember, by the way, this is only the first 5 entries in this collection, so the other 2 that we did are probably further down, number 6, 7, 8, something like that. So I'll now come back out that we have something. So if we now look at this particular gallery of ours, I'm now going to change it to basically say we're actually going to filter my Exhibit B, okay, my Exhibit B, and then we come into our image control here, and instead of using the SharePoint way or using the icon field, we're going to use the data URI, image URI column. Image URI. Boom, straight back. So this is looking good. This is at the point where I'm going to pause this video and do the final image URIs over in SharePoint so that we can finish this off. Okay, I've just generated all of those data URIs. So if I come back to my app now and if I refresh this collection, if I get lucky, we should have all of the images come through. Beautiful. There's a couple of other things I still need to do. My image name, I think, yes, that's right. Because we're doing the SharePoint library, I don't actually have a, this would be top menu name. Beautiful. Okay, we'll just need to fix up a couple of column names here. That's better. So we're saying, right, filter my Exhibit B, where the top menu name equals whatever you've selected in the gallery. I want the submenus to be not blank, so I exclude the top one, do it in the right order, and away we go. So if we press play here, let's have a look at how we're faring. Boom, boom. Boom, nice. We don't have the latency problem with the hyperlink method. We can run on any device. The app is smaller, and guess what? It works offline. Why does it work offline? Well, if we go back into this collection and have a look, my exhibit B, we have the entire information about the image already here stored. And now using the offline commands called save data and load data, you will save that collection to the local cache. And that way, when you load the app, you can actually load this collection from the local cache, which will then initialize those image URI columns, which will then render. So the image control in PowerApps has no problem handling data URI format as well as normal URL format. The only caveat with this method, I guess I can see, is it therefore has to, that data URI can get quite big. If you use this for a 3 megabyte high-res file and have a gallery of them, then you deserve everything you get from your user screaming at you. This is really designed for icons, thumbnails, and small stuff, okay? But it's certainly nice that you could have logic in your app that when the app starts, it could basically go, is there a difference between my local cache and what's on the server? If there is, let's reinitialize that collection. In other words, perform this task, get the latest one, and away we go. But if there's not, or I'm offline, just use the local collection. So that in a nutshell is the idea of using data URI images in document libraries. So to recap, what we've done is we get a standard run-of-the-mill document library. I added an additional column to it. It was a multiple line of text column called image URI. And we then used flow, a very basic flow with a couple of extra actions and a flow expression to convert the image to a data URI, which is then pulled down into PowerApps and can be used in galleries and collections. So, hopefully you got some value out of that. I've used it in various scenarios. I have a lot of times where I have to do offline, and I like the control it gives me as far as being able to centrally maintain certain settings. Thanks very much for your patience and attention, and we'll talk to you next time.